Well, happy Sabbath. Thank you so much for singing. I almost feel like I better be careful. I'll ruin that because that was so beautiful. It was wonderful to lift our voices like that, and I really appreciate it. It's graduation weekend at Blue Mountain Academy this weekend, so there are a lot of individuals who are quite excited and nervous, some of them for different reasons. Some people will be getting up and speaking, and they're super nervous about that. Others are still wondering whether they will graduate. There are some who are excited because they're celebrating this is a milestone. There are others who are excited, like myself, who realize, oh, we're going to miss you, but please go. In fact, I found myself saying that not too long ago about one of our students. And I just thought to myself, I cannot wait till this young man leaves. And I'm pretty, I'm pretty laid back. It's pretty tough to ruffle my feathers. And my this sounds, I guess it's come out of my mouth a few times recently. I don't know if from up front, but 10 years I've been a dean in a dormitory. I feel like, based on those numbers, I started deaning when I was like 9 or 10. But it's just not true. It just doesn't seem like it could have been that long that I've been doing that job and literally just loving it. But occasionally, you get that one student who seemingly is just unresponsive to anything you do. And so here I found myself recently being critical of this young man. Just, oh, come on, please get out of here. Getting to the point where just the type of interactions that I see him having with other people and the stuff I'm having to deal with was making it tough for me to look at this young man. You know? And my heart was pricked because then I thought of a story of another guy. He was on a mission trip, and he was good. He was crafty. Not necessarily a rotten kid, but I think for some people, they were probably getting to the point where they could no longer look at this guy in the eye and be happy that he was around at this school. On this mission trip, they're working. Seemingly, everybody's there for the right reasons. You know, it's a mission trip. And they're working together, and this young man and his best friend are smoothing concrete. They get done. They're cleaning up the tools, and this one teacher comes up and starts kind of yelling, sort of just kind of getting after this young man's best friend for the way he was cleaning out this wheelbarrow. And this first guy that I'm telling you about, he was crafty, he was good, because he was the kind of guy who could say things that were so ultra disrespectful and not really say anything wrong. Do you know what I mean? You guys know those kind of people? Joe, you're resonating with this? All right. So, just kidding. And so as he's kind of, the teacher is kind of saying some things to his best friend, this other guy approaches and he says, whoa, Mr. Harrington, why don't you just calm down? And Mr. Harrington explodes. I mean, this is the last straw he's had with this young man. He explodes. He's like, you've never seen me excited. And so this young man steps back just a little bit, but didn't want to give too much ground up. And Mr. Harrington says, you want to see me excited? I'll show you excited. And this young man, as calm as he could be, says, Mr. Harrington, why don't we talk about this when we're both acting like adults? Mr. Harrington then left the job site. This was in the morning. Mr. Harrington left the job site on a mission trip and did not come back for the rest of the day. To this day, that is a comment I regret making. I a couple years ago contacted Mr. Harrington and apologized to him for the many altercations that he and I had. And I just thought to myself, man, what a shame to have been perceived in a certain way. Not necessarily wrongly. I said those things. I did those things, you know. One time, Mr. Harrington, that made him pretty mad one day. He actually got in my face and he goes, "What, do you want to hit me?" And I said, "You'd like that, wouldn't you?" I mean, we were not on good terms. I said no, I wasn't going to hit him. But, man, I mean, I had given him a lot of reason to feel the way he did about me. No, absolutely no question about it. The thing about it was, though, I was a young, dumb kid. And I don't know why. I have great parents, great grandparents, great community, awesome church. But, boy, authority was not my gig. Had a tough time with it. And I got to thinking, you know, at some point I made a bit of a transition. I don't know if it was from my sophomore year to my junior year, or however that looked. But you see that, now that I've been working in boarding academy a while, you see that as people grow, there's like this magical little moment where it's not like they're getting it all perfect, but there's this magical little moment where you're like, a new person has evolved. The old caterpillar is gone, away with you, and this, not totally unrecognizable, because, you know, a butterfly still kind of looks like a caterpillar with wings. So not unrecognizable, but different. It's awesome. You see that little growth potential. And I remember coming back to school one year after having maybe got a job. Different things went on in the summertime for me, and I came back to school. And I was sitting in class one day, and I had a teacher, not Mr. Harrington, but a different teacher who I also had an equally healthy relationship with. And I was engaged. I mean, this was science class. I do love nature and things like that, so I was engaged in what was going on. And this teacher, I don't even remember what I did, but it truly, I'm honest with you right now, it truly was innocent, whatever it was I was doing. You know, maybe it was asking another student about, you know, something he had said about the lace wing, or I don't know what it was. But he just went off on me and said, "We're not going to start this year out like this." I mean, he just went off on me. He even swore at me. He was already so mad at me. I hadn't even done anything. I mean, it was first class. I made him so mad, but I just took it. I wanted to be a different guy, and so later on I approached him. And I said, "Mr. E," I was short. I said, "Mr. E," I said, "Hey, listen, man, I know that I've given you a lot of reason to doubt the kind of person I am." I said, "But I want you to know I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. I don't want to be that guy that you expect these kind of things out of." I said, "I'm trying to turn over a new leaf, but I need you to let me turn that new leaf over." Mr. Eaton, being a very gracious man, said, "Okay, I can do that." And he treated me very kindly moving forward, was very patient with me, because obviously I still had some caterpillar in me, you know. But he was very gracious with me. It was awesome. Now, I love telling stories. I love them. In fact, if you know me, you know that there's a good chance that you're going to have to stop me from repeating any story that I may have already told you. Eric, any comments on this? Many. All right, good. And it's likely that I will just keep telling the story because I enjoy it so much, even though I know you've heard it. So there's a story that I came upon recently, and my heart was pricked as I was preparing to speak today about the words of God. Because I thought, how am I feeling about this young man who I can't wait to leave school? And how many people thought this way of me? And am I letting this guy turn over a new leaf? I don't know. I got to ask myself that honest question as well. But there's a guy here in the Bible, as I started to put all these thoughts together, this story that I came across, his name started out in Acts, we find him, if you guys want to turn there. We're going to start in Acts 9, verse 1. Started out with the name of Saul, you know. I had a work supervisor in high school who once told me, "Jason, you got to leave your name on your work. How do you want your name spelled when somebody comes and looks at your work?" And then he spelled a word, that represented what my name was at that time, and I realized I did not want my name to be spelled that way. I wanted to be proud of the work I had done, and that was how he taught me that little lesson. But Saul was this man's name, and some baggage went along with it, because Saul was a persecutor, right? You guys know this story at all? Any little pieces of it? Saul was a persecutor. And so he went around persecuting the people who were in the way. The Bible talks about the way is this term that really just meant Christians. People who were in the way, people who believed in Jesus, people who believed in Christ. He went around persecuting people that were in following the way. And man, he did it with all his heart, you know? I don't know what his motivation was, but he was in it to win it. He said, this is not right. I don't like this. Whatever it was, whatever was being challenged that he did not want challenged, that he felt he needed to fix, he was 110% in. That was Saul for you. He was all the way in, and he was a persecutor. You know, as I first read these first verses, it says, meanwhile, because we've just heard a little story about Philip. If you want to go home later on today and just read a first couple of these chapters leading in, you find what Philip has been doing. And so we read some information about Philip, but it says, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. You know, I'll be honest with you. There are times that I feel persecuted. You know, sometimes when I'm not the only one speeding and I get pulled over. You know what I mean, Steve? Sometimes I feel persecuted. And I'm down, it ruins my day because I don't know what you guys feel persecuted from. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe some of you are feeling persecuted from finances right now, or maybe, Sue touched on something today, and some of you are in relationships that are unhealthy, whether it be at home or at work or at school or whatever you're doing, in some social club, whatever it looks like, maybe here at church, I don't know. But you find some kind of little pieces of persecution in your life, and they really, to me, I sometimes have to check myself because I realize they're so out of balance for what's really going on in my life. All the good things are going on, and I'm just distraught by what? I don't know. I think, and I don't know if the Lord sent me through this experience to help bring me back to reality over and over again, but there's this image I have in my mind. My buddy Jesse and I were driving in Africa in this cool Mercedes-Benz Unimog because we were driving some supplies to this mission outreach that we were going to. And we, as we drove there through the African bush, we came out to a clearing and saw this little mud hut over in the field. And it was probably 70 degrees outside. I mean, real nice temperature, but there at certain times of year, it would get down to about the 50-degree range at nighttime. So it was cold, and then if you never got a chance to warm up, 70's not that warm. And as we came into this clearing, I see these 4 little kids huddled up against the bricks of this mud shanty, just trying to soak up the sun to get warm and be up against the warm bricks for heat. And I mean, they're so poorly dressed. And so Jesse and I, we stopped our vehicle. We said, we got all this stuff for the mission outreach. Let's give these little guys a coat or something like that. And so we got some clothes, and we got off and they were, wide-eyed looking at us. And they were a little far away. Well, as we came closer, they were terrified. They'd never seen any white people before. They thought we were ghosts. And one of them was so terrified he did not run. He just huddled even tighter against the wall. But 3 of them ran off into the weeds. And then when we presented our gifts, he was much more comfortable then. And we gave him a little coat. And then he yelled out to his, I don't know if it was his, didn't know what they were saying, but he yelled out to his other 3, and they came back, and we got him little things to wear and whatnot. And I just thought to myself, I mean, this is one of those images from my time there that is burned into my brain. And I don't know if the Lord put that in my brain so that I would stop feeling sorry for myself over nothing. But it's that image that comes back to me when I'm down in the dumps over, give me a break stuff, And I think, man, that's a life of persecution. When you're huddled against the bricks to be warm. And here was a life of persecution. Saul was on the hunting path for people. I mean, to put them to death. Finding ways to take their life from them, their families from them, their homes from them. He had sent out the letters to get permission to go and take people captive. And what's so amazing about this is that it fueled the fire in people to live more bold lives. They weren't crushed by it. Philip was not crushed because he knew Saul was coming for him. Philip met that challenge and said, you know what? There's no complaining here. Nothing about this situation is as bad as it could be. And so he lived on with fervor. But Saul was a persecutor. That's real persecution. When I take a look at this story and I compare it to some of the things that I cry about, I have no pace. So he's still spewing these murderous threats. Went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, which is a ways from Jerusalem, so that if he found any there who belonged to the what? The way. These people of the way. Whether men or women. And see, that's an interesting point too, because he hated the idea of people in the way so much. You know, war was a man's thing, right? War primarily is a man's thing. Women, you guys are so much better than us. War is this man's thing, but they hated the way so much that they asked permission also to take the women in this fight, to squash out the way. Whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Man, Saul is this guy who's 110% in, and yet he's so blind and ignorant, right? He's encountering God. The being that he believes deep in his heart he is fighting for. This mission that he's on. And he gets this question, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And how does he respond? Who are you, Lord? Does that sound familiar to any of Jesus' teachings? Some of you will say, when did we not? When did we? Because sometimes as 110 miles an hour as we're going, we fail to take time to really meet Jesus. And sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we don't recognize, and we're asking, who are you? And here Saul is. He's all in for God. He's all in for this position that he has in the religious world and doesn't recognize the guy that he's fighting for. Who are you? Saul asked. I am Jesus, who you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Now there are 3 accounts of this in this book alone. Do you know that? There are 3 accounts of this story, so that's why I really resonate with the writer, Eric. Okay? He couldn't just put it in there once. There's a couple other places up in verse 22, I believe, and 26. They're all pretty similar, but there's a couple little, variances there. But the writer of this felt the need to repeat this 2 or 3 times, these stories, to remind us of what a transition looks like. Because Saul, even though he could see, right? What was he? He was blind. Blind to the God he was fighting for. He replied, now get up and go to the city, and you will be told what you must do. Wow, that's interesting. You will be told what you must do. I don't know about these visions. It's tough. For a guy who I don't think I've ever had a vision before. It's tough for me to see how this works out. John and I were talking a while back about a movie that we watched where this guy was talking about this vision, this voice that he heard. You know, this is out of Hollywood, a movie that actually didn't make faith look stupid. He feels and hears this voice in his heart. He said, this voice told me to go get the book. I went over there, I found this book, and it said, take it west. And so he went to take it west. Says, really, this voice and everything. He's like, listen, I know what I heard, and I know I'm not crazy, and I found this book, and I'm taking it where it told me to take it. I don't know how this vision stuff works, but here Saul has had this vision where his heart and mind have been spoken to, and what's so neat about the way God communicates with us is that it's so special to us. God is huge and big, but it's special to us. You know how I know that? Because here in verse 7 it says, the men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They had heard the sound, but they couldn't understand, nor did they see anyone. How could they have been there for this and missed it? But Saul understood. He heard the message, and what's so neat is as we read down, we're going to find that somebody else was just receiving a message at the same time. So that when Saul showed up, yeah, he's not crazy. He knows what he heard, and he's not crazy. And it's confirmed when he goes further into Damascus. So Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could not see anything. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. Now, I don't know if the Lord just really does have a great sense of humor, but I don't know if there's any better way to remind somebody how blind they are than to actually take their sight. Can you imagine going through an experience like that? Now, there's something to complain about. I got elbowed in the throat a month ago. I'm still not fully recovered from this, but one of the thoughts that went through my head is, what if I can never talk again? Joe, is that exciting for you? What if I could never talk again? I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, but as soon as I got elbowed in the throat, I had no voice. I could project no sound. And 2-3 weeks later, still it wasn't that good. Even today, I've been trying to not use it too much. Of course, as a dean, I have to do a lot of yelling, but even today, I could still feel it, and the thought occurred to me, man, what if maybe the Lord is reminding me that you know what, Jason? The way I'm going to remind you that you're not speaking out the life I'm asking you to speak is I'm going to take your voice. What if that's my message? But there's no better way for God to have reminded Paul that he is blind than to take his sight. So they led him to Damascus. His friends did. He was with an army of people going to destroy those who believed in the way. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink. I think that would depress me too. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called him in a vision. These people are so lucky. Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Man, can you imagine receiving that vision, knowing that other instructions have been given, that this whole thing has been orchestrated, and that you are this cool piece of it? I know I've said this every time I've preached this year, but I want to remind you again. When you dive into the script, when you get into the Bible, ask yourself some things. What's God doing with the people in the Bible? What's he doing? What does this story tell us about those individuals? What does this story tell us about God, and what does it mean for me? This is very interesting because I see Saul is going through a transition. A full life change in a matter of only a few days. So, Lord, verse 13, Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. You ever had a talk with God before like, Lord, you're crazy? But our vision is not the same as God's. You know, and you realize that when you work with other people, especially people who have a different perspective than you. Speaking again of the dormitory today, I find that the students that I work with have these blinders on, right? And they make a lot of their decisions based on the moment. A lot of their self-worth is based on only what they see here. You find that somebody who is in a relationship, that's sometimes all they can see, they forget about all the important stuff. But you also find that sometimes these kids will get in trouble, and now all they can see is the trouble. And until you can give them new perspective, that moment, that event is defining them because that's all they can see. These blinders. So what does this story mean to us? Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and the harm he has done your saints in Jerusalem. He has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name. Our vision is not the same as God's, and so it's so crucial that we be the kind of people that can have perspective sometimes for the people in our lives that are not having the real perspective, because God had the real perspective in this story. Imagine if one of these two individuals had not responded to the vision that God gave them. Imagine what this book would look like. We could rip this portion off. If only one of these individuals had said, I will not take new perspective in my life. I will not listen to the voice of God calling my heart to follow him. Man, the history of the Christian world for the past 2,000 years would be different. Two people. But the Lord said to Ananias, go. This man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings and before the people of Israel. I will show him how much he will suffer for my name. Can you imagine the weight of these few moments as these people respond to God? And they started out blind. Paul was blind. Even Ananias was blind. I mean, his perspective was very narrow about who he was going to include in people that belonged in the way, right? Because if you can so imagine, there are people that I have encountered in my life, especially when I was younger and did not know how to let things roll off my back. Boy, if you had told me in high school that Mr. Harrington and I would do ministry together one day in a church or at a camp meeting, I might have fought you. Don't insult me like that. My perspective was so narrow. A couple years ago, he did ask me to come and speak for camp meeting. Isn't that weird? How does that happen? So, our vision of what can happen in our worlds is just so narrow sometimes. And here these two men are. But Ananias, thank the Lord, listens. Ananias reminds me a little bit of Mr. Eaton. Do you know what I mean? Because the Lord was telling him, look, I know who you know Saul to be. But I'm telling you, he's turning over a new leaf. And you have to let him. And Ananias did. Ananias responded to the call of God to build that healthy relationship, to allow somebody who had a pretty rough history in the way of Christian relationships, allow them to change and become a new person. Then Ananias went to the house, and he entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit. I want to pause for just a quick moment because I shared a story with you guys in 2012 that I never was able to give you the full account of. We talked about communion and that my heart was pricked that I'm not the good guy that I thought I was, because in that very room with communion, I think I have a pretty good relationship with most people, but I found myself in a room with an individual that I harbored ill will against. I made a connection with him, thank the Lord, and he was so gracious to me. I invited him to lunch. He said, yeah, let's go to lunch together. And while we were there, we just had this awesome time of rebuilding what could have been a relationship of many years. But it started only back in January, that we mended some fences. And I told him, I said, Rob, you need to understand something. You've never had an enemy in me, but I want you to know that from this day forward, you will have a friend. And man, he was so gracious. It was awesome. And we talked shop. He's in a similar line of work as I am. We talked shop and shared stories. After it was all over, we embraced. Sometimes, as clear of thinkers as we think we are, we find ourselves so blind. And so here's this fractured relationship between Paul and the people of the way. And there are individuals who God is pricking their heart to change that. Ananias comes. He buries the hatchet. He says, it doesn't matter what I've heard about you, Saul. I'm going to believe that the Lord is going to repair all this. Places his hands on him. Filled with the Holy Spirit. Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized. And after taking some food, he regained his strength. Amen? I mean, is that not a sweet story of transformation? Of individuals who start out as a caterpillar. And even though they're not completely different, they're still recognizable. I mean, Saul was still 110% in whatever direction he was going to go. You knew that about him. But now he had wings. And Ananias and the rest of the Christian community of that time, they didn't hold Saul to the person that they expected. They allowed him to become that new person. And for Saul, it was so neat because when Saul became blind and Ananias touched him and prayed for him and the Spirit moved in that room, when Saul's eyes were opened, he had a new sight. Not the same sight that he had before. It was brand new. His eyes were open to a new type of vision that he had never had before. A new encounter with the guy that earlier in the story he didn't recognize. That's Saul. And then this is cool. It says this, Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. Can you imagine what that must have been like? People are hearing Saul is there, like, this is kind of a trick, or, I mean, is he just trying to gather us all together? I don't know. Spent several days. At once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. At once he made that transformation. He probably still had some Saul in him, but he made that transformation. I was reminded that when I viewed this young man who I'm in some ways excited will leave my dorm, my heart also has to be pricked that I also from time to time need to realize that I'm blind and that I need God to allow me to have new vision. Is the stuff that I'm going through in my life, is it that bad? When I compare it to being huddled next to the bricks, when I compare it to the persecution that Saul put forward to the people of the way, is my situation that bad? When I compare it, I have to be a little more honest with myself. It has to give me new perspective. God has to give me a new vision sometimes. Sometimes I see people. Maybe it's the people I work with. Maybe there's a teacher that irritates me at the school. Or there's a church member that I'm just not that fond of connecting with. Not you, Lori. I know that was 2 out of 2 for you, but it wasn't you. Sometimes we have to allow our hearts and our minds to be opened. To allow God to show us our blindness. To allow God to take that and help us evolve. But then also, we forget about sometimes the Ananias portion, is that sometimes we also have to let others do that. We have to see them for the change that they will go through. Because again, what if either of these individuals had denied the calling of God to bring about change in that relationship? Man, what a different story. What a different book we might be holding. I want us to be a congregation of people, a group of friends and family who allow God to take us through experiences that give us a new kind of vision.